had, I'm not going to call the resistance in Lebanon terrorists for a reason, because they were officially invited by the Syrian government. And people basically, they accuse me of being what you call whitewashing terrorists. I'm not. I'm just using the terminologies of international law. If a government officially invites you to help it out, then your presence on the ground is either that of a legal militia or a
But you
mercenary,
also,
if
but
you
you,
pay them. But they were not
yeah,
paid. So
yeah. But just,
there are,
just one quick one on that as well. I don't mean to interrupt because
no, it's
I'm
fine.
enjoying the flow of the conversation. Is that there was also a threat to Lebanon because I remember there were certain attacks in Assal, and that also played into the interest of. Although some will say, well, why did the Lebanese state not do that? And Hezbollah, you know, as a non-state actor, decided to go into the war, which is a question I will also ask you. Why did Hezbollah, as a non-state actor, participate in the war in Syria?
Okay, so let's go back to this point. There are two types of people who went over to fight in Syria. One's from Beirut and North Lebanon and the Bekaa area, who were against the Assad regime, who occupied Lebanon for the longest time, and they tortured people. So there are lots of people who have vendetta against the Assad regime. And those people went over and they started fighting first with the revolutionaries, but then with anybody who would pay money, because we also had a financial crisis in Lebanon and everybody needed money. So those people, mainly the Sunnis, the radical Sunnis in Lebanon, went over to fight in Syria alongside terrorist groups like Julani groups, okay? We had basically al-Nusra Front, but later on when he actually created what you call Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, before Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, it was Ahrar al-Sham. They rebranded within the same year between 2016 and 2017. So those Lebanese fought with him against every other group that was fighting on the ground. Okay. Then there was basically the other Lebanese group, and that includes Hezbollah and Amal movement, who actually went into fighting in Syria in May 2013. Not from the beginning of the war in 2011, like the rest of the Lebanese who actually fought in Syria did. Why? In 2013, in May 2000, shortly before May 2013, we had a series of explosions that basically Abu Muhammad al-Julani, who today calls himself Ahmed Shara, but he's not, he had basically ordered a series of strikes against Lebanon, suicide bombers who actually came about and started basically blasting themselves in Lebanon. Some of them, basically, their explosive belts didn't work, so they were detained. But others actually succeeded in killing and basically injuring hundreds of Lebanese, killing and injuring, okay? So like wounded plus those who were martyred. And most of those attacks happened against the social fabric of the resistance that supports the resistance, Hezbollah and Amal movement in the Beirut southern suburbs. At the same time, around the same time, a border town between Syria and Lebanon, it's on the
What
Syrian territories, it's
is
called
it? Al
Al-Qusayr.
Qusayr? This is
Yes,
Al Qusayr.
yes. Al-Qusayr, if you actually, no, you have to zoom in so I can explain it, all right? So the town of
Qusayr.
Qusayr historically used to be part of Lebanon, and the French actually carved it out and gave it to the Syrians during the creation of what you call the borders between both Lebanon and Syria. And the Lebanese over there are part of the clansmen who live on the other side of the borders in Lebanon. So the families continue to marry each other, and there's a large number of what you call Lebanese diaspora living in that village. They got attacked by the terrorists of Al-Julani and basically ISIS later on. And some of those people, their families actually are fighters in the resistance. So they had taken the permission to go and fight over there to defend their families. Some of the women were raped, some people were killed. So the resistance actually took part in defending their people in Al-Qusayr. They crossed the borders over there, but they didn't venture deep inside the Syrian territories at that time. What happened is that they found, and it's all documented, you get to see the videos, they found factories that were manufacturing explosive belts. There were Captagon factories as well. So at the end of the day, it's not basically just the Syrian regime who is accused of basically trading with Captagon, it's also the terrorists on the ground, everybody who wanted to make a basically fast cash, aside from the money that they used to get from the GCC. Fast forward, almost 6 months down the line, the Syrian government, whose army was well fanned across the country fighting all these terrorists, and it was basically losing in certain places, asked its allies, Iranians and Hezbollah, to help out officially. So they actually took part in the war inside Syria, but they fought against the terrorist groups over there. They didn't fight against civilians as the propaganda ran. But for those who don't believe it, because they've been brainwashed by nearly a decade of what you call American propaganda, Jeffrey Feltman in 2016 stood out there and he said, we've spent $500 million to disfigure or what you call smear the image of Hezbollah in the region and beyond. So all that smear campaign was about Hezbollah fighters raping women, Hezbollah fighters killing children, Hezbollah fighters killing civilians, etc. Now, on the ground, you don't know who's fighting whom. And for the civilians, if I tell you basically I'm with Hezbollah, but I'm not, I will tend to believe what you say. And this is how the propaganda started flowing. Yes, there were mistakes committed, and I'm not defending Hezbollah when it comes to Syria. Mistakes were done on the ground when they started recruiting Syrians to fight alongside Hezbollah. So there was the Syrian Hezbollah fighting alongside, and perhaps the mistakes happened from that side because everybody across the world saw how Hezbollah fights against the Israelis. If they wanted to harm civilians, they would have harmed them from day one. If they wanted to
Yeah.
go in and basically do anything, they would have done that from day one. But it's all propaganda. So having said that, throughout that period, Hezbollah and the Iranians actually managed to what you call group the terrorists in a small place in the northwestern part of Syria, mainly in Idlib, if you remember.
Yeah.
And
In the north.
yeah, and that area had basically the Turkish control over it. And the Turkish control basically supported the Muslim Brotherhood also over there, who used to be like, remember in Hama and other places which were fought by the former Assad regime, like the father of Bashar al-Assad, Hafiz al-Assad, the former president. He actually,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say nuked them, but he gassed them and he bombarded them over there, the Muslim
Yeah, in
Brotherhood.
Ham.
They were in
So
Hama
this
and
was in Hama, and I think in Homs, in Hama.
yes, yeah. And it was in certain areas because the largest bulk was in Hama. But there were some people also in Idlib and other areas that were fought on the ground without having to like basically have all what you call this major attack against them. So when you look at the situation, the Muslim Brotherhood over there tried back in the 80s to create what you call this revolution, and they failed. And then they tried again in 2011, and they were supported by Turkey, Qatar, and the rest of the Arab nations. And this is why they managed to actually create much damage on the ground. So by the time that all these terrorists were grouped in one place closer to the Turkish borders, or like away from Damascus, that's when Bashar al-Assad made his fatal mistake. He is like, okay, so I'm in control of the situation. There's no need for Hezbollah anymore or the Iranians. So he told them, thank you, get out of the country. And they left. And
Yeah,
that was the cardinal mistake that he made.
yeah, yeah, but would you say this he did that to whitewash himself, to give himself a good image because there was a lot of pressure that they brought in all these foreign fighters. And by the way, it wasn't just Hezbollah. There were other fighters that came in from Iraq and
Of
from
course, but I'm coming to
yeah.
the next step of the terrorists as well. So, like we spoke about the ones who came from Turkey, we spoke the ones that came basically the ones that that came from Lebanon. We spoke about the ones that actually came about from Syria towards Iraq. Then they came back from Iraq towards Syria, and then you had ISIS that was basically established in the region that was supported by the Americans and the Israelis that fanned about from Iraq to Syria as well, which actually gathered some of those riffraffs alongside them. So the fifth one was the one that basically what you call supported from an international audience. And in that manner, we're going to call them the ones who came from Chechnya, from China, from the UK, from France, from other countries. And those were brought about by multiple what you call mercenary groups, private military companies that were funded for by some GCC states, including Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And the Americans and the Israelis gave them air cover and cover on the ground as well. So all of those together were fighting in Syria. It was an international war on Syrian territories. But the reason
Yeah.
was not only to topple the Assad regime, because the petty grievances between Arabs and basically Assad regime is one thing. But when it comes to the actual fight, it has been prepared by the Americans for the longest time. But the Israelis also were preparing for it. Not a single state that has direct borders or proximity to the Israeli entity is allowed to have strategic weapons. And in 2011, if you remember, 2012, the Israelis first came up and they bombarded what you call a chemical factory in the desert of Syria. And that's when everybody knew that the Israelis are trying to destroy the what you call the abilities of the Syrian army in acquiring chemical weapons. They didn't want to have strategic weapons at their borders that could threaten them. So this is why the war started over in Syria. The Americans had been planning it for so long. For those who don't believe me, You can go to what General Wesley Clark said in 2004 and later on repeated it in 2009, 2010, all the way until today. General Wesley Clark said that in 2002, 2003, he was approached by somebody who works at the Pentagon while he was visiting. And that guy told him that the decision has been made to topple the regimes or create chaos in 7 states. And he named them. And that included Egypt and Lebanon, Lebanon and Syria. So Syria was one of those, and it ended with Iran. Iran was the 7th state. So Iran was always the end goal for the Americans, whereas Syria was one of the states that would clip the wings of Iran from expanding in the region, and it would clip the wings of anybody supporting Iran as well, and an ally to Iran, and an ally to the Russians as well in the Eastern Mediterranean region. So that's why they were creating this string of what you call toppling the regimes to create what you call organized chaos across the region, so they can actually reshape the region into the new Middle East that they have been planning it for so long and they can control. And they cannot control the new Middle East without toppling the strongest ally of the Russians, which is basically the Iranians. Now, Iran is a massive country as opposed to others. That's why they were surrounding it with what you call military bases. That's why they were targeting it with propaganda throughout the past 20 years. They have established more than 63 media outlets to target the Persian audience with Persian language, including basically Saudi channels that actually speak Persian, NBC Persia, for example, among others. And slowly but surely, you start to changing the people's mindset. And eventually, when you create problems on the ground and you put sanctions, economic sanctions for the longest time, and you impoverish the people and the government, that's when you actually can move military-wise and weaken that state. Now, we're going to talk about Iran later on, I know that, but I'm explaining basically the whole situation on where does Syria fall in this. Syria falls in this as an ally to Iran, as an ally to the Russians. And it had to be toppled so you can actually corner the resistance in Lebanon, which is the strongest threat to the Israeli entity. The only weapons or the majority bulk of weapons and training that used to come to the resistance in Lebanon used to come from Iran through Syria to Lebanon. Once you topple the regime in Syria and you put somebody who is pro-Mossad, pro-Israeli in the government, basically in the government or basically in rule, just like we saw with Julani. He's a self-appointed president. He was not elected.
Hold on. Back up a second. Again, a lot of information.
Sorry.
What do you mean pro Mossad, pro Israeli? Because from what we had on the ground, it was a popular movement that toppled Assad. They brought in this guy that is charismatic, that is, that connects with what the Syrians really want. So, are you saying for a second that Jolani is not really who we think he is? Because from what I see on the ground, a lot of Syrians were celebrating that Assad was gone, and they're showing all these pictures of Sednaya prison and the whole atrocities that Assad have committed. And then this guy have come in to liberate them. In fact, there were reports, people were celebrating that, oh, we're going to get back the Golan Heights now. The whole of Syrian territory is going to be ours, and Syria is going to be prosperous again. And you are saying that all of that is a hogwash.
Well, let me explain one thing. Like, people need to read history. The problem is that with people in our region, they don't read. And if they read, they forget or they don't understand. And I'm not attacking people, but I think it's because of the quick lifestyle that everybody has. Nobody has time to actually sit and think about it. It's my job to sit and think. So I used to get paid to do this kind of job as a strategist. And when you look at the whole situation, you start finding out things that are unbelievable. So let's start with the history of Syria. The Israelis actually managed to plant what you call a spy in Syria. His name was Eli Cohen, but his ground name was Kamel Amin Thabit. The guy planted himself as a Syrian who came from diaspora from Argentina that wanted to actually invest in his own country. And Kamel Amin Thabit managed to convince all the Syrians and all Syrian officials with the right documentations that he had with him and his charismatic basically character and his basically ability to actually access all these circles, that to the extent that they were about to appoint him as the deputy defense minister in Syria. And that's an Israeli who's Jewish, who was born and raised to Egyptian Jewish parents in Egypt before moving to the Israeli entity. He had zero connection to the Syrian land, okay? So he was not Syrian, but he managed to sell himself as Syrian to the whole Syrian people and the officials themselves, because they had people who inside the Syrian regime who were able to, what you call, not for falsify papers for him, but they acquired him the right documentations to give him a new identity as a Syrian who lived in Argentina. That's why he had an accent, supposedly, and he came back to the homeland. Now, Julani, when he came about to Syria, nobody knew about him. Okay, and there are lots of discrepancies in terms of what he spoke during the interviews. And we had people looking into the registrar in Saudi Arabia, in Syria, and in Iraq, looking for somebody called Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, and there was no existence for that guy. But of course, once you take over power, you get to falsify whatever papers you want, and you become legal as a president at any point. And he nationalized over 30,000 foreign fighters, including some of them Lebanese, by the way. So going back to Julani, Ahmed al-Julani, how did he come about to Syria? He was sent from Iraq supposedly to Syria to be the head of Al-Qaeda in collaboration with ISIS, right? Al-Qaeda is basically, we're talking about his group, it's called Jabhat al-Nusra fi Bilad al-Sham, al-Nusra Front in the Levant, which basically is Al-Qaeda's arm in the Levant, okay? That guy is a proscribed terrorist who not only killed Iraqis and Lebanese, but also Syrians. And now he's the president. And they're trying to whitewash his background. Now, does anybody mention his terrorist background? The US just scratched him from the terrorist list when they wanted. But what was the main reason for bringing him over? The first thing that he said before the last attack against the Assad regime, what did he say? He said, we're going to liberate Jerusalem. We're going to pray in Jerusalem. And the moment he took over power, what did he say? We have no power to fight the Israelis. Not a single bullet was fired by his people against the Israeli entity, who now controls more than 600 kilometers squared of South Syria, Southeast Syria, and parts of Southwest Syria, including the basin, the Al Yarmouk basin, which controls 30% of water that is needed by the Israeli entity for itself, because the Israeli entity and Palestine are basically what you call dry land. So when you look at the whole situation, they planted somebody to sign a peace agreement, and I remember December 2024, and I have it in a recorded space. I wrote, basically, I told my listeners on Twitter, and I said, we have credible information that Julani met with Israeli Mossad officials on this night, and they stayed for half an hour before they left back to the Israeli entity. And I was afraid that somebody would delete that space, so I wrote it in a tweet, and I said, what was the Israeli helicopter doing on the peripheries of Damascus for nearly half an hour, and who did it meet? So it's in writing. I have it in writing as well. December 2024, everybody made fun of us as MENA Uncensored team, and we don't work haphazardly. We have contacts on the ground. Then, January, February 2025, we wrote that Julani met again with the Israeli officials for a longer time discussing the Abraham Accord. February 2025, people also made fun and like, no, it's far-fetched. This guy is the Fatih, the conquistador. He's the lion of the Sunnah, blah, 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 you know. They're trying to shush you, and they do smear campaigns against you, so you wouldn't tell people what's happening on the ground. February 2025, one of the MPs from the Israeli Knesset, from the Hatoum family, he comes out and he says, we are meeting with Julani, like our officials have met with Julani. And everybody from the Muslim Brotherhood to the GCC states, so everybody's like, we don't see, we don't hear, we don't talk. Then again, Shibani met officially a month and a half ago with Julani in Paris, and this meeting was attended by Tom Barak, the US envoy to Syria and Lebanon, and he's also the US ambassador to Turkey. And they did it officially. And the next meeting that happened between Asad Shibani, who was the foreign affairs minister of Syria, and his Israeli counterpart in Paris, happened 2 days ago. And they announced it on the Syrian National News Agency, SANA, Syrian Arab News Agency. It was officially announced. So Julani was put there on purpose for a reason, to actually sign an Abrahamic Accord with the Israelis, peace treaty, that allows the Israelis to annex all of Golan Heights, if not 3/4 of it, and that last quarter, this is what they're discussing, should it be under the Syrian control, but the Israelis lease it from them or not? We actually divulged all those points beforehand, like 3 months ago, that they're discussing what's going to happen to Julan and what were proposed on the table, because we had somebody inside in Paris who actually gave us the information, and it's in recorded space as well. We spoke about how basically they are going to allow for investments, Israeli investments in Syria and vice versa. Companies that are owned by the Israelis who would take contracts inside Syria without any competition. And if you look at the whole situation, the Israelis look at Syria, most of it as part of Greater Israel, and they want to, they keep throwing information in the media that makes people think, look at one place, but things are happening in a different place. So like the Zanzibar the corridor, if you remember, or David's corridor, David's path, right? This is
Yeah.
irrelevant. They're going to take almost all of Syria. So this is irrelevant. The naming is irrelevant. They don't want a corridor. They want 3/4 of Syria. They don't want just a corridor. And if you look at the whole situation, there's also the issue of the Kurds. The Kurds in the northeast Syria, and basically they want to unify with the Kurds in Iraq from Erbil and other places who are allies to the Israelis. The Israelis don't want to give them a Kurdish territory.
Yeah,
They
but
will
the
keep it
one.
autonomous, but not a state. So they can always run
So
after
so
them.
what?
Like,
Yeah. So what is the purpose of supporting the Kurds in Rojava in Syria and the Kurds in Erbil? Like because the Kurds in Iraq are also divided. There's the Barzani part in Erbil and there's the Talibani part in Suleimania. These
yeah,
two
but
guys don't really have.
almost all of the Kurds want to create a Kurdish state on Iraqi, Turkish, and Syrian territories. It's that triangle between northeast Syria and basically southeast Turkey and basically Iraq from the other side. That triangle will be the new Kurdistan for the Kurds. This is what they think that is going to be given to them because the Americans supposedly had promised them, but they will never have a state of their own. Why? Because the Americans want to keep them on a leash. They will give them an autonomous region, but never a state of their own. That's why SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, or we call them قسد قوات سوريا الديمقراطية in Arabic, they were supposed to be handing over their weapons to Julani, and then later
But
on they found out that they were
it
going to
didn't
be
happen.
backstabbed. They backed off from that. They signed an agreement with him, then they backed off after they saw what he did to the other people who actually handed over the weapons, the
Yeah,
Alawites and the Christians.
in the north, which is on the coast in
It's
Latakia and
northwest of Syria, exactly, the west coast of Syria.
Tartus, and I even saw the videos in Banias, dragging them like dogs and beating them and
Yeah.
making them, back like dogs. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, so apart from
So,
Turkey
so that
and
person never existed. I'm sorry, but like
yeah,
Julani never
Jolani.
existed on paper because there were three versions of the story that he was born in Saudi Arabia. Then they said like no, he was born in Syria. No, he was born etc. And he was neither born in Julan nor born basically inside Syria and Hama or whatever they want to call it. And he was never born in Saudi Arabia. We couldn't find papers that corroborate that story. Then we looked into basically his background as supposedly somebody who got detained in Iraq at one point by the Americans and then he was let go. This is how you actually create terrorists, like somebody that you release from jail, that he's Syrian, and then you send him to a place and then basically he sets that background and narrative that he's Syrian. But nobody
Yeah,
knew who Abu Muhammad Julani until much later, right? This is what people think. But if you actually do a small search on, like proper search online, the first person to mention the name Ahmed al-Shara, Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, was an antiques dealer from the UK who is self-proclaimed expert on terrorists, who said that Abu Muhammad al-Julani is actually Ahmed al-Shara. And then that story died on its own. That person, we believe that he's part of MI6. And this is how you start planting traces in the media. So in the future, when you start searching, you'll find that background
they
for
find
him.
it.
The
Yeah,
second time that his name was mentioned as Ahmed al-Shara was in 2021 when Ahmed al-Shara, basically Julani, gave an interview to PBS TV, which is an American TV. And he said basically that, like they said that his name was Ahmed Shara, but nobody created a fuss about it. They let it be mitigated. Again, nobody focused on that point.
yeah,
Why? Because if you create commotion, people will go and search. The Assad regime is already in power. They can go out and say, like, this person doesn't exist. This is not true. They let it fizzle away, but it has a digital trace. And then when the Assad regime got toppled, he came out and said, I'm Ahmed al-Shara. And then they claim that he studied media. He didn't. Then they claim that he studied medicine. He didn't. Then they claim that basically he studied business administration, and he
so
didn't.
yeah, so
So, like,
who
always
the
three
hell is
stories.
yeah, so who the hell is this guy if we don't have any trace of him, if the whole stories are being planted, in order to deceive and in order to disguise his identity? Does it have any connection to Abu Musab al-Zakawi? Because again, with the whole Zakawi story and how he left Jordan, born in Zarqa, it's all shady. These have always been like the whole ploy by Mossad in the region, where they create these fake identities of individuals that we have no idea where they come from. Is it the same thing we are seeing in Syria? And who the hell is in charge in
It's
Syria?
he's exactly the same case scenario as Eli Cohen, or basically Agent Kamel Amin Thabit, the Israeli Mossad agent who was planted among the Syrians as a Syrian with proper documentation. And by the way, when we exposed Julani, and it's in a recorded space back in December 2023, the next week, the week right after, we actually said that we couldn't find any papers or documentation for him in Syrian documentation centers, like the nationality centers and the passport centers, right? The Israeli came about with their warplanes and destroyed every single documentation center in Syria. You can go back, it's all recorded.
Yeah.
Not only our space, but also the attacks against the passport and basically what you call nationality centers in Syria were attacked and completely destroyed by the Israelis. Why? Because when this guy took over power, he can issue his own papers as the new self-appointed president of Syria. Then he nationalized 30,000 foreigners as Syrian. Can you claim that they're not Syrian now? No, legally now they're Syrian, supposedly, including Lebanese. And I will give you an example of the Lebanese who fought alongside him and now they hold high positions with the Syrian passport. One of them is from the Shahadi family. He defected from the Lebanese army in 2011-2012 and started fighting alongside Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra Front in Syria, along Abu Muhammad al-Julani. Today, that person is tasked with handling the intelligence apparatus alongside along the Lebanese borders, along the Syrian borders with Lebanon. And he's the one who negotiates with the Lebanese army on behalf of Julani. And there's another person as well who recently not recently, but he had defected long time ago from Lebanon. He was detained in Lebanon multiple times. His name is Shad al-Mawlawi. Shad al-Mawlawi was detained in Lebanon, and at one point, one of our prime ministers got him out in his car from detention, not from jail. And that prime minister is Najib Mikati, whom I personally believe he has ties
left.
with the French. Okay, so let's keep it on the side. That person got out of jail, went over and rejoined Julani people. Julani recently appointed him as the head. Back then, he appointed him as not the da'wah person, but today he is appointed as the head of what you call the prisons of Julani in Syria. He's of Lebanese origin and he has now the Syrian passport. So this is the kind of people who fought with Julani since day one, and they're all terrorists, but nobody mentions them in the media. However, the American media and GCC media all focused on what? Hezbollah fighting in Syria since 2013, not 2011, and Hezbollah killing the Syrians, not those people, among other terrorists since 2011, killing Syrians in the name of a revolution. The revolution started with actually honest people who were fed up with the Syrian regime. I give them that. But it was soon hijacked by all these terrorists, and that revolution didn't happen haphazardly. The thing is, all these international powers will find a weak spot and basically will cap on people's hatred towards the regime, and then they will move them on the street with anything. And then they will cap on it and then hijack the revolution. It will seemingly appear as a revolution in the media that they have created, but it's actually a war on Syria.
Yeah, and from the outside looking in, you think, oh, it's a revolution. The people are tired of the government. They're trying to kick out Assad. But if you look at the way what happened in Syria and the intervention from the outside in Syria, compare that to Bahrain, for instance, where there was a similar uprising against the minority government, and the way the kind of response we got from the West, they supported and shore up the regime. There could have been similar, there were noises, about the similar uprisings in some parts of Saudi Arabia. It never saw the light of the day, and so on and so forth. But why Syria? Why? Because again, like you said, Syria have refused to acquiesce to the dictates of the powers that be in the region,
Show
i.e.
the map of
So,
Syria. Show
yeah,
the map
yeah.
of Syria.
I
Show
will,
me. I want to
I
point
will,
out something.
I will, in a,
Just,
I will in a second. I will in a second. But I want to
yes,
finish up on
sorry, there's a
on the,
delay.
on, yeah, I will in a second. But I want to finish up on the issue of Ahmed Al Shara, aka Abu Mohammed Al Jalani. If he, in quotes, because we are speaking tentatively here, is an Israeli agent. We don't know for sure.
No,
Why
I
did
know
they
for
talk?
sure. You can
Why
be
did
not
they?
sure. I am sure.
Yeah.
I
So
will.
why
You
did
can
they?
leave. Not
Why?
leap of faith. I will believe my context when they say he is Israeli. Full stop.
Yeah, yeah. So why did the talks support him? Why did the talks arm him to the teeth, and supported him to the end, until the end where they removed Assad, and continue
All
to
right. So
believe
show the map
that
to explain to why the Turks supported them. Show the map of Syria now. I'm going to explain it on the map. Okay. So at
yeah.
one
So
point or another, the Turks support the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood are against Assad. That's one. Two, Turkey couldn't beat. Okay, if you zoom in on Syria and the
yeah, I
borders
will.
between Syria and Turkey, Turkey couldn't beat Syria when it comes to the manufacturing of what you call textile and food industry. They always competed against one another. The first thing that the terrorist groups that came from Turkey did when they entered Syria was attack the textile industry, steal all the machinery that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and bring them back to Turkey. They destroyed most of the food and agriculture related basically industries, agro industries in Syria. And the ones who dumped all their products into Syria were Turkey. So like economy wise, The Turks benefit from that. What else? The Turks want to what you call subside the Kurdish threat to them. Now the Kurds are in northeast Syria. So like, do you see like that small angle towards basically the right side of
Gaziantep,
the screen? Yeah.
Gaziantep, Iskenderun, Antakya, like the whole region.
No, no,
I
no, no,
think
no,
it's
no, 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 no. I'm not talking about this one.
not
Look at the other
okay.
side. No, yeah. So
Al Hasaka,
northeast.
Al Hasaka.
Exactly. So from Al-Hasak all the way to the borders with Iraq, that area poses a threat to the Turkish side across the border, because that's where basically the Kurds want to be separate, like separating with the Kurds from the other side and creating their Kurdish state at the expense of the Turkish territories. So what they did, the
So,
Turks now, they have dozens of what you call bases inside Syria at the moment, in North
mhm.
Syria and Northwest Syria, to just go and control and subside that Kurdish threat. The
Yeah.
agreement
So
between the Turks and the Americans is to never allow the Kurds to have a state of their own, but they can have an autonomous region. This is why I'm telling you, like, there's not going to be basically what you call a Kurdish state going forward. So the Turks also want to control that part for geostrategic purposes. That's basically controlling the Kurds. And the last point, so aside from the Muslim Brotherhood, aside from the it's not agro, the business and the industry, among other things, there's also basically the Kurdish threat. And the fourth point, and this is the main one, is basically Turkey wants to be a main player in the region. And the only way it can do so is if it has what you call pressure cards on the table, that it can actually allow it to sit and deal with the big states, the US, Russia, China, you name it, because they control parts of what you call Syria through the Muslim Brotherhood that controls Syria at this point. So this is these are the four main reasons why Turkey is invested in that. That's aside basically from controlling what you call any wealth that appears in the sea between Syria and Turkey, and basically it secures the northern part of Cyprus that Turkey controls as well. So that triangle now belongs to Turkey, and I control anything that passes through there all the way to Europe. Geostrategic position again.
yeah, so it's about the geopolitics of it. But again, if the talks knew about the role of the Mossad, for instance, in supporting and propping up Jolani, why would they want to put themselves in that situation? Because the Israelis are now also asking questions of Jolani and his
But the
government.
Turks are
And
allies with the Israelis. I mean, this is
yeah,
something that
yeah,
people
yeah,
don't cap
yeah,
on. The
yeah,
Turks are allies with the Israelis. The Turks
yeah, but
continue to send perishables and energy to the Israeli entity. The Turks continue to support the Israeli entity with not only boots, military boots, but they also support them with manufactured bombs. We have proof with pictures that we posted on Twitter of bombs that actually read "Made in Turkey" on them, that were used against the people of Gaza. The ones who cry over Gaza day and night on TV, like Erdogan, are the ones who are enabling the Israeli occupation to continue to, I was going to say unalive, to kill the Palestinians in Gaza. So at the end of the day, the Turks, they don't care about us. They dream of the Ottoman Empire. They have an extension through their allies. They want to sell weapons like drones, among other things. And by the way, the main military drone seller in the region are the Turks and then the Iranians. The Turks through the Bayraktar group, which is basically owned by the son-in-law of Erdogan, the one who actually brings about the energy
and
tankers. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
and it's good it's good you brought up the name. Is it Berakta, or I know the
Bayraktar is basically the name of like the last name of
Berakda.
the
So so
Bayraktar
so
group.
bas-
They also do it
so
in Africa,
basically,
by the way.
in Ukraine, by the way, they set up its stuff in Ukraine, and they were, because there's a big story about that as well on the Russian side, which is something we can
They
talk
were
about again.
testing their drones in Ukraine, and then they started selling to Ukraine. And they're selling basically to African nations. They're selling to GCC nations like Kuwait. They signed an agreement with Kuwait, and they were trying to sign an agreement with Qatar recently. So if you look at the whole situation, Turkey wants to expand as the main exporter of what you call military equipment through the son-in-law of Erdogan. The son of Erdogan, Bilal Erdogan, actually controls the oil tankers that brings about the Azerbaijani oil that comes to Turkey and then to the Israeli entity. So it actually brings that oil from Turkey to the Israeli entity all the time. And that's the regime that's supporting the Israeli entity. So at any point, the Turks will have no problem with the Israelis taking over 3/4 of Syria, as Netanyahu had showed on the map. However, the northernmost part of Syria is left. The Israelis are not saying it's part of Greater Israel. Do you know why? Because it's
Why?
left to Turkey. It's left to Turkey.
Yeah. So are you suggesting for a second that this is some kind of reenactment of Sykes-Picot with these two powers ganging up to carve up Syria?
It's all the powers ganging up to change the Middle East, and each one is trying to make what you call a grab of its own, like they're grabbing land and they're dividing land among each other. Whoever supports the winning side will get a piece of the land at the end of the day. And if you don't believe me, I mean, it's like too many coincidences are not coincidences. It becomes an actual plan that is in place that has been happening for the longest time. The Americans have been speaking about the new Middle East. The Israelis have been speaking about new Middle East since when? Since the 70s and 80s. Kissinger had spoken about the new Middle East. I mean, like the most stupid of all the US basically presidents, what's his name, like that adulterer, Clinton. He actually spoke
Yeah.
about the new Middle East basically since 1996 or 1998. And if you look at the whole situation, everybody had been speaking about it except for the Arabs and the people of the Levant sitting there like, no, it's not going to happen. We don't believe it. It's really hard to happen. Like they live on hope. And this is why
Yeah.
they lose all the time. They're not strategists. They actually, you tell them what's going to happen, and they will attack you for telling them what's going to happen, and then they will tell you it's not true, and then they will try to smear you over that. I faced it myself
Yes.
personally. So,
Somebody needs to clip this. Like this is this is golden. The fact that you're able to say this, and exactly because it seems that the outside powers see this, they see the division, they see the sectarianism, and they come in to play this game of divide and rule. And the Arabs in the region are saying, well, it's not like that. It's resistance. These guys are Islamists, and we stand with them because they're defending the religion, they're defending the faith, and know how there's no way on earth Jolani can never be allies of the Israelis. And by the way, you said something before, which
mm,
is which I asked you. I'm like, oh, if Jolani is really working with Israelis or have any contact with the Israelis, why the hell are they bombing him? And what was your response that day? Can you tell
okay.
them?
Oh, it's very easy. How do you actually establish the credibility of someone when Julani actually took over power and he refused to fight against the Israelis? That's when
Mhm.
people start saying like, oh, he's in league with the Israelis. He's not basically pro basically Syria. He's going to do this and that. It's bad, etc. So how do you give
Mhm.
somebody credibility? You bombard
Yeah,
here and there, but you don't
by
assassinate him.
attacking them. Yeah,
They could have easily taken him down. They could have easily taken him down. They didn't. They bombarded here and there. They eliminated the ability of the Syrian Arab army. They destroyed all the weapons of the Syrian Arab army, not Julani. Why? Because they feared that the remnants of the Syrian army would use some of those weapons to attack the Israelis later on and create resistance movements. They didn't attack
Mhm.
Julani per se. The most recent attack that happened against basically what you call entities that belong to Julani was the one that we saw 2 months to 3 months ago when they bombarded what you call next to the defense ministry and next to the what you call presidential palace, but not the presidential palace. And
Mhm.
the whole idea is that is to give him credibility. Like, how do you plant an agent? You attack him and then create stories about how he hates you and you hate him. And then when people search about it, like, oh, the guy has a history in doing that. And this is
Mhm.
how you actually this is how you plant your own agent. How did they plant Eli Cohen? How did they plant lots of basically what you call spies on the ground? They create these stories that give them credibility, that they are against a certain entity or regime or whatever it is. And they
Mhm.
do it for the longest time to the extent that it becomes in people's minds, this person basically is credible. And that's how they believe them. And this is what the Israelis did. Like they didn't attack him except for that one incident, and that's it. That's it.